Madam President, I'm back on the floor again for Waste of the Week number 10. As my colleagues know, I've been coming down every week talking about waste, fraud, and abuse, ways we can save taxpayers' dollars. While we have not been able to address, unfortunately, tragically, the larger issue of the plunge into deficit spending and debt that our nation has incurred over the past several years in particular. Every bipartisan effort has been thwarted by the president's refusal to engage in that, and yet the debt clock keeps on ticking. We keep spending more money than we take in. Keep putting more and more of a burden on future generations as well as our own. Our economy is not growing. One of the reasons is that we have not achieved fiscal responsibility here in the United States Congress. So while we've not been able to address the larger issue, we can at least address some of those issues that have been documented as waste, fraud, and abuse, documented by nonpartisan agencies that are established for the sole purpose of weeding out some of the excess spending that doesn't serve a real purpose, is not essential to the functioning of government. And we've put up some pretty interesting numbers relative to what we've achieved. We're already at the, we're somewhat well over now the $50 billion of spending that has been documented as totally unnecessary. Some of it has been of the character of the somewhat ridiculous. Some has been very, very substantial. And we're going to continue to do this, pointing out to the American taxpayer and pointing out to government officials who run these agencies and make these decisions that we simply cannot afford to keep doing this. So today's Waste of the Week will be addressed, hopefully, because I'm urging my colleagues, and I will be introducing legislation to this effect, that the Appropriations Committee, which will soon be working, now that we have passed a budget, soon be working to distribute those funds that are necessary for the functioning of government. I'm urging them to, in this process, use a system and means of identifying what is essential and what isn't essential. Now, there may be some things that we would like to do but can't afford to do. They need to be put on hold until we can do them. But there are a lot of issues and a lot of spending that goes on that shouldn't be done in the very first place. Significant savings can be made, even though it's much smaller than what we need to do. We certainly can address issues that will save taxpayers' dollars and better allocate spending for government. When our previous governor in Indiana, Mitch Daniels, took over, he brought with him a resume as former director of Office of Management and Budget. Then President George W. Bush gave him the name The Blade. The Blade looked at every small little detail of spending and asked a lot of questions. Why? Why are we doing this? How can we save? How can we make government more efficient? We don't want to take government, there are essential things government has to do. But when he became governor, he transferred over some of that knowledge and expertise and started doing some simple things, asking some simple questions. Why are we spending money on this? Why are we spending money on that? Let me give you just a couple of examples. He gathered some of his staff and said, I want you to go out and put pennies on the tires of our state-owned vehicles, wherever they're housed, wherever they're parked. Put pennies on there. And he waited several months and then said, now go back and write down the license number and the vehicle number of all those vehicles where the pennies are still on the tire. In other words, they hadn't been moved. They hadn't even been shifted to another parking spot. They just simply were sitting there. Well, interestingly enough, he found that 2,500 unused state vehicles still had the pennies on their wheels. He said, if they've been sitting here for months and nobody's using them, why are we paying for them? Why are we spending money on purchasing these. Let's sell them off, save some money for the state. They obviously aren't necessary. It was a third of the state's fleet of vehicles. Another thing he did is said, let's look at our printing costs. The state had its own printing operation. It was like a lot of state-held operations in our federal operation. It was kind of bloated with excess spending. And he said, let's shop around and see if the private sector can do this more effectively and efficiently. And of course, they did find a private vendor in Indiana that did it much more effectively. He said, you know, do these things have to be all glossy and colored? There's a lot of pieces of paper that we pass out and read. And here, even in the Senate, these are not colored brochures. They're simply black and white. But we're putting lots of fancy colors on. Save a lot of money just by going black and white. Now, maybe not quite as pretty, maybe not quite as attractive, but another way to save money. These are small things. But when you total them up for all the agencies that are in Washington, as was determined by the National Commission on Committee on Fiscal Responsibility and Reform, it adds up to a lot of money. This government is more vast than anyone can possibly imagine. Well, their analysis and their investigations into waste involving travel and printing, along with, I think it was travel, printing, and some other provision here, was a total up to be $10 billion of savings over a period of time on which we look at our budget. So here again is a waste of the week that we're going to add to our ever-increasing gauge of the waste. All this now is in red. These are what we've been added, the 10 items that we've added, and we're approaching now, looks like $60 billion on our way to $100 billion. I think we'll probably be having to add extensions to this because, folks, I mean, there's waste out there, there's fraud out there, there's abuse out there like you wouldn't believe. Should we be dealing with a larger question, the runaway entitlements, the lack of money to adequately fund NIH or scientific research or education, but we can't because our budget is totally out of control? Should we be doing this? Absolutely. That's what we're here for. We made a valiant try. We have talked about this for the last 5 years since I've been back here. And despite the many, many alternatives that have been presented to the White House, every one has been rejected. So at least let's do those things where we have more control through the appropriations process and better manage government, make it more efficient and make it more effective. And that's why we point out these, and we'll continue to point out these. The waste of the week, number 10. I can't wait to get down here next week and do number 11.